Hey, it's Soul with some more Shadowlands coverage, and today I'm going to make a hasty decision. As we approach the Shadowlands beta, I think I have all the information needed to choose a Covenant flag to wave, and it should be of no surprise to anyone that I decided to choose what is obviously the most useful Covenant, with the best ability and utility, and of course, the prettiest. And so I, Soul of SoulSoBreezy, choose the Kyrian as my Covenant for my main, a Paladin tank. Boy, you never saw that one coming, right? Today's video is going to explain why I chose the Kyrian and not the other Covenants for my reasons, personal preference, feelings over facts. I'm going to get specific in my own weird way, and I welcome your disagreement in the comments. I'm going to spend time not defending, but just explaining my decision in the face of many outspoken and, frankly, more experienced and skilled players than me. I'm speaking out as an example to make a point to anyone who's on the fence, deciding between which Covenant folks like you want to join and which Covenant you might be pressured to join, because that's not the same thing. I'm probably sticking my neck out and making myself vulnerable to those of you out there who think the Kyrian are the wrong Covenant to choose for, whatever reason. Of course, what'll be really humorous is when I look back at this video several years from now, after having changed my Covenant a bunch of times, and think, gosh, how young and ignorant I was to choose the Kyrian of all things. Ho ho ho. So let's compare things, starting with the Covenant signature ability at its base level, Summon Steward. The real ability, though, is the Phial of Serenity that my customizable bird creature person will give me, which has a 1-minute cooldown or a once per encounter cooldown. It heals, but more importantly, it cleanses most buffs, not including special encounter debuffs that otherwise can't be cleansed by anything, even Divine Shield. But otherwise, this ability is dope. It enhances my personal gameplay style of self-sustainability. It's kind of my thing. Historically, as a paladin, it's my job to use the various immunities and cleanses that I have to cheese as many mechanics as I can. The Phial gives me an opportunity to save a healer's cleanse for someone else, or to maybe cleanse a strong physical bleed after I used my Divine Shield, or after I used my Blessing of Protection. So forget the heal, it's the cleanse that I think is an amazing utility. Paladin mobility is bursty, and so the Night Fae Soul Shape would be okay as a filler speed boost, but since actions will take me out of Soul Shape, I don't find that ability very useful overall. The Necrolord Covenant ability would be great, if not for having to channel to maximize my shield, which might not net me a lot of effective health if I'm taking damage while channeling, as opposed to doing things to generate holy power. Door of Shadows is as useful as the group that I'm in. If I want to cheese something, everyone needs to have Door of Shadows, or, well, minus stealths, summons, teleports, and whatever. But me taking advantage of Door of Shadows likely means that I have to force my will onto others, or I would have to alter the way that I build groups, and that's not really the sort of game that I want to play. Moving on to the class Covenant ability, Divine Toll, also known as Fan of Shields, is what I experienced on the BlizzCon floor when I first playtested Shadowlands back in 2019, some 50 years ago. It's still awesome seeing 5 shields bouncing around. Now, it's not a perfect ability by any means, it's just a 1-minute Avenger shield in a single target situation, and as of this recording, I have no idea what conduits will do to it, but it's still a winner in my book. Meanwhile, Blessing of Seasons was disappointing, and even if it gets better during the beta, I don't think it's going to make up for the other shortcomings of the Night Fae Covenant, which I'll talk a little bit more on later. Ashen Hollow for the Venthyr does incredible damage and healing, but the long cooldown and the limited space makes it kind of situational, and in a raid encounter, it's something they can only use a handful of times. Vanquisher's Hammer is probably the most versatile, with a short cooldown, and it synergizes very well with holy power generation, which makes it overall, it's the best thing for tanking. But its current iteration still doesn't quite feel right. It forces me to use multiple abilities on the global cooldown, and I don't like how it momentarily locks a few button presses. So if I could have Vanquisher's Hammer and be still part of the Kyrian Covenant, that would be great. That isn't a case to make it so that we can have Covenant abilities be hot swappable or anything, it's just that, well, I had to make a decision, and this is the decision that I made. Now onto the visuals. You know, I just straight up like the look of Elysian Hold compared to the other Covenant sanctums. After all, I'm going to be here quite a bit, and I want to enjoy my environment. Sinfall is a hole in the ground. It's a basement, which, you know, it isn't so different from the Paladin Order Hall in Legion, but at least that was a much more open space. This is just a hole. The same goes for the Necrolord Sanctum, the Seat of the Primus. It's just a tomb, which again you can compare to the Paladin Order Hall, but in this case it's dingy, it's kind of depressing. The Heart of the Forest, though, is really pretty. It's just really pretty, but it's just not a theme that really fits me. Standing on Elysian Hold is like standing over the rabble below. I feel like I'm in a really exclusive spot above the rest, and I'm not just barred from walking through a doorway. And of course it's got chonky bots, and you can't go wrong with chonky bots. As a paladin, the coolest looking plate set is, hands down, no question, the Night Fae set. Yeah. The enchanted wood is just straight up unique. It's different. It's wood, but plate. and I love that. But for anyone who knows me and has watched my content, you know that I'm less conventional when it comes to transmog. So the most important bit of transmog that comes out of Covenants for me isn't the armor sets, but it's the Covenant cloaks. And the Kyrian clearly have the best ones. They got wings and halos and stuff. It's much cooler than a gravestone or a hobo backpack, as I like to call it. I said that I would probably end up running around topless with wings on my Blood Elf. I mean, it sounds silly, and it is, but I'm gonna do it, and I stand by that. As of this recording, I haven't tried out the different side activities for all the Covenants. The Kyrian Covenant is all about taking our soulbinds to this thing called the Path of Ascension, a series of fights that we prepare our soulbinds for. If nothing else, I just like the theme of it. It's like, you know, an anime fighting tournament or something. By contrast, I like the Build-A-Bomb for the Necrolords. I think it's cool, but I would have expected its own fighting tournament, since that's what Maldraxxus is all about anyway, right? As for the Queen's Conservatory and the Ember Court, which I did get to do a test drive with, I'm just less excited over the idea of farming or tending to parties, at least on my Paladin. Those sorts of activities just don't seem to mesh well with that character. Of course, diving into soulbinds will sort of mean that I need to decide how it is I'm going to use them, so let's get right to it. As a tank, Clea is probably going to be my progression soulbind, and I'll focus on the use of Ascendant Vial. Thanks to potion changes, pre-potting combat potions won't be necessary, but as a tank who will likely take stacking tank debuffs of different varieties in raid fights, using Ascendant Vial before the pull, it just might prevent me from taking a debuff stack early on, which is nice. And what's more, is that during the fight, I might be able to use my file to not just cleanse a tank debuff, but to again prevent 1, maybe 2 stacks from building thanks to that 15-second immunity. That is, of course, if it works the way that I hope it does. I'll probably choose Resonant Accolades to provide some extra healing to myself or for others because, hey, I'm a paladin. I can do that. I'll likely take Cleansing Rites to have a bit more effective health on the pull. And Valiant Strikes just seems great. I can do some free passive healing for the team. Pelagos is probably going to be my more aggressive soulbind, less for the boons that he gives, but more for the extra throughput conduit. Let Go of the Past is an easy 5% versatility, done. Focusing Mantra won't be as useful in a raid, but it would be in something like Torghast or Mythic Plus, and this gives me access to another throughput conduit. The same goes for Bond of Friendship, but Combat Meditation could prove to be both pretty strong for both damage and mitigation if I can let myself move around freely. Mykonikos, if I'm pronouncing that right, is the wildcard soulbind that I would play around with for maybe PvP battlegrounds as a tank. Charged Additive should be really useful and is on a short cooldown. The same goes for the Sparkling Drift Globe core to help prevent death from a stun lock. Or I would consider the Soul Steel clams for guarding objectives, which would stop that old sap and cap tactic without having me use a trinket or an immunity. I'd probably end up taking regenerating materials if I were to use this soulbind in a Torghast build, maybe to save some gold, and I'm pretty notorious for forgetting to repair while climbing or doing anything, actually. Braun's call to action seems random. It'll either knock enemies back, or heal you, or damage enemies, or maybe all three. It still doesn't seem like a bad final ability to have as a tank. I mean, there are very few moments where you don't have something to press, so this thing should proc in under 2 minutes while you're in combat. I believe that for the way that I play, which is non-competitive, heroic rating, and maybe some Mythic Plus, the Kyrians are a solid choice. They look, and they feel cool, and they speak to my character. Now, keep in mind, I'm eventually going to play as every Covenant anyway, because I want to experience the different storylines and minigames. Since the Shadowlands announcement, there's been a growing concern about choosing a Covenant, because one would inevitably be singled out as the one to choose for raiding, or PvP, or dungeons, or all three. Maybe another Covenant would be singled out as the one for the baddies. Meanwhile, I've spoken out over the past however many months that Blizzard is challenging us to make choices, but how about I ask you this question? I'd love to hear your answers in the comments, especially because, well, there's no right answer. What kind of World of Warcraft do you want to play? Do you want to perform well because you made the right decisions and followed the guides? Or do you want to perform well in spite of your decisions and followed your heart? I'm going to stress this again. There is no right answer, but I've observed that these two philosophies are causing a lot of friction between players. You'll notice a segment of players who like being competitive. They've railed against Blizzard for introducing features that hamper optimization, and they often tell Blizzard to stop forcing us to play a certain way. And yet, many of these people have a problem with fellow players who don't play the same way they do, these baddies or suboptimal players, to use kinder words, I guess. But actually, let me walk that back a little bit. They don't have a problem with these players, they just don't invite them into groups. I don't like using the word hypocrite, it's a little bit harsh, because if we step back, we've got to remind ourselves that, hey, we're just playing video games. Even terms like hardcore and casual have lost a lot of their meaning because there's nothing wrong or hardcore about simming if the difference between two choices just can't be eyeballed. And choosing a theme that fits your personality isn't what I would call casual either. But like many critics, I can see some immediate shifts in player behavior come Shadowlands, like Venthyr-focused teams, because there's a certain strength in being able to blink an entire raid team 35 yards away. Maybe Death Knights who aren't a part of the Necrolord Covenant will be pariahs in the Pug world. Using myself as an example of someone who can choose their Covenant for roleplay over optimization is a statement, but it's not going to change anything. And I do get it when the people who want to perform well at the game are mad at Blizzard for forcing them to play a certain way. But guess what? The same goes for you too.